Well, I think I always had an intuition about that trees were in communication. I didn't think of it that way. I just saw them as like the people, like they're just the forest. They all grew together. They all lived together. They were hundreds of years old, and they were, wrestling against each other. The smells, the sounds, it's a whole system. And so I had that deep intuitive knowing. It was just maybe it's an ancestral knowing. I don't know what it is, but it's a knowing. And so then when I became a forester, it was more about ripping apart the forest, right? Cutting down the forest and planting the forest in a way that didn't resemble the forest that was ripped down. And I thought they're not they're not in conversation anymore. We've missed the conversation as the forest industry, or if you will. And so then I wanted to piece it back together. I thought, there's something really missing here. And so that's what got me on my journey of trying to understand where we were going wrong because it didn't match with my deep knowledge. And so that set me on the quest of trying to document the communication and the connections that I already knew in my heart existed. And so then I started discovering through my graduate degrees all these techniques, and I learned more about the fundamental, ecosystem. Like I didn't know that there were, fungi and bacteria and all this in the soil. I knew that the soil was an amazing thing, but I didn't know the details. So I started working with the details and I started working with the methodologies, but I was always kind of on this quest to understand how these plants all work together. So yeah, imagine yourself, you're in a forest or you're in your garden and you're digging around and you start to notice that there are little white threads in the soil. And these little white threads are actually attached to the roots of plants. Those are fungi, and those fungi are a specific type of fungi, the ones that are attached to the plant roots, and they're called mycorrhizas. And mycorrhiza, just break it down. Myco means fungus, myco like mycology, and rhiza means root. So it's a fungus root symbiosis. And it turns out that these fungi and these roots are attached to each other. In fact, they're interwoven into a almost, they're like one thing, right? They grow together, they evolve together, but they do different jobs. And so what the root does is it delivers food or photosynthate, which the tree is making with its leaves through photosynthesis, and it's sending that carbon rich stuff, that food, and the fungus slurps up some of that food, that sugary, nutritious soup, and it uses it to grow its own body. And it has to do it with the plant because it doesn't have leaves itself, it lives underground. And so it uses that food the plant makes and it grows its body through the soil. And those are the threads, its body or its threads. And so those threads grow out into the soil and they encounter little, pores in the soil and minerals and organic matter, and they kind of slurp up the nutrients, the nitrogen and the phosphorus and the micronutrients, and they bring them back to the plant. They travel back to the plant and they basically trade them for that food. And so it's an exchange. It's a reciprocal interaction. So they're both working together in concert in what's called a symbiosis. They're in it together and they're collaborating and trading. In the forest, it's all about the relationships. It's all about how these creatures are all working together. It's they're collaborating, right? They're trading, they're working together. Sometimes they compete with each other. Like one might grow a little taller and it might take a little more light, and then the one underneath gets a little. So that's a competition. It's a kind of relationship. Usually, what happens is that plants and organisms have many kinds of relationships. They're complex, right? It's not one kind versus another. So they collaborate, they compete. They might parasitize sometimes. If it's a saprotrophic or pathogenic fungus, it will actually eat the other thing. So it can be parasitic or predatory. But the whole range of these interactions, including collaboration, is what builds the whole forest. It's the relationships that matter. So the fungus actually, it's those threads are all through the soil, right? If you're in the forest and you look at them, you realize that the whole soil is packed with these threads. And it turns out that some of the threads connect trees together.
Wow.
They form little pipelines, if you will, between trees. And so and you have to have the certain kind of fungus and the certain kind of tree. But generally, in a forest around here, where I live in Western Canada, most of these trees share some species of mycorrhizal fungus in common, and these common species can link trees together. And so I started mapping with my graduate students what those networks look like in the forest. What do those connections look like? And so we started, you know, counting the connections, and we found that the big trees had the most connections with other trees. And that, makes sense because a big tree has got lots of roots and it's got lots of points of connection. And it also has a big photosynthetic capacity. Like it's got big crowns, lots of energy moving through that tree into these networks that then can connect and communicate with its neighboring trees. And so we found that because the big trees were the most connected and the most rich, energetic, we started calling them mother trees, just the biggest trees in the forest. They produce big cones as well. So they're, the cones, the seeds drop, and the little seedlings that arise connect into the networks of these big old trees and they become hooked into them. And so that also, conjures up this mother tree idea. It's regenerative and it's connected. Well, there's so many levels of students, right? From the very littlest kid to the eldest person, and everybody wants to learn, and they also have this innate understanding already. We already know that we're connected and that we come from nature and that we're part of nature and we're all intimately linked. And so there's that visceral knowledge in all of us. And so when I take students, so I teach at a university, I take my first year students into the forest, and all of that wonder, that basic ancestral knowledge in them comes bursting out of them when they get in the forest, and you start talking about the connections, and they're like, of course, right? And they just love it, drink it in because it makes sense to them. And so that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Or it doesn't matter if it's a 18-year-old or an 80-year-old, you touch in on that knowledge already and people go, oh yeah. And so it's a very wonderful thing, that early validation of what's already known inside of us. And then as far as like discovery of scientific knowledge, I think one of the, so many things, there's so many things, but I think one of the things is just that trees, that they have this incredible perception of their neighbors, of their surroundings, of who am I living with? What are they doing and how healthy are they? And can I communicate? And we're finding all this stuff out that they are in this deep, deep communication. And one of the things too that the big trees kind of know what the little ones are doing and they're connected to them and they recognize their kin. They recognize who's who. And that they adjust behaviors accordingly. And I think that's been a really incredible finding for me. And maybe it's because, as I come from the background of learning to be a forester and watching forest practices that really don't honor that very natural thing, that we try to, we've kind of disconnected the system and forgotten about those basic things that makes the most sense. So I like that. I like that we can rediscover and re-show and reignite in us that knowledge that we once had. So, and change forestry, right, to really take into those natural processes right into account. Just helping people remember. Um and it's been hard. There's many audiences and many biases and many vested interests. And so when you talk just with people get it right away, right? People understand this already. But when you have all this other, when there's laws and policies and economies and that are all built behind it, there becomes defensive of what's existing already, and there's inertia to change, and so that's where it's become harder. There's even scientific inertia, right? Like there's this, we have a the scientific methodology that is being, that we've accepted as how we do things, how we see and value things, sometimes puts blinders on us, and we get so, you know tunnel vision around that science that it kind of short circuits our our intuition and our curiosity. So that's been a challenge as well. So but overall, I would say that we are heading in the right, as we lurch towards the future. That there is an increasing understanding of the forest as basically a regenerative place, and that it has this incredible capacity to heal, and that even at the highest levels of like the United Nations, there is that understanding, and that we have a reliance, or we have incorporated into our international treaties that a solution to climate change is to allow forests to recover and grow and be healthy. And so I think that is based on that basic understanding of how a forest works. So first of all, like you said at the beginning, I've written hundreds of journal articles, and I knew how to do that. Well, more or less. Some people are really a lot better at it than I am, but getting the basic science out, but it never got the traction that I felt like we needed. Like we have urgency to our situation here. And so I wanted people to I wanted people to understand right away of what was going on. So I wanted to reach people. And you can't reach people through scientific journal articles. And so I wanted to write. And I always, like I said at the beginning, I always wanted to be a writer. So I wanted to bring this storytelling aspect to my science. I wanted people to be able to read a story and absorb this science that I thought could help us make better decisions. And so I I didn't really know how to do that. I knew how to tell a story, but I didn't know how to write about a story. So I ended up I got a writing coach, and I got an agent, and I learned how to write like that. And so do I have it's a it's the weaving together of the science and the personal story into a seamless fabric that makes somebody want to read it, and then they just absorb it just through the story. That's the magic of that kind of writing.